Good evening and welcome to Yada Yahweh Radio. I'm Greg. We're here with Kirk this evening. How are you, Captain Kirk?
Good evening. I'm doing fine, thank you.
Good. I want to begin with what I think is one of the most deplorable conspiracies of not only our time but of any time, which is Black Lives Matter. It is not only a racist organization. It is not only a communist leaning organization. It is an immoral organization, and like a religious organization, it is based on ignorance, internal contradictions. We know for certain that if a black is killed, 93% of the time, the murderer will be another black. So if Black Lives Matter, and they do as much as any life matters, no more, no less. But to the extent that you want to focus on black lives, then even though blacks represent 13% of America, they're responsible for 93% of black murders. Mm-hmm. You ought to be embarrassed. You ought not be marching and saying Black Lives Matter and blaming it on everybody but yourselves, when the problem is clearly yourselves. You have no one to blame but yourselves. Well, a Black Lives Matter Chicago organizers, after a couple of nights of rioting and looting in the Windy City, said that the mobs who vandalized and looted downtown businesses the night before did nothing wrong, calling it reparations for black suffering. The only reason that blacks are suffering is because of their lack of work ethic. I'm sorry, it's a cultural problem. Through liberal politics, copious amounts of money have been thrown into minorities, particularly blacks in the inner cities. Blacks are 4 times more likely to be on welfare. They are 4 times more likely to avail themselves of food stamps and government-supported housing, the reverse income tax credit, which is just a fancy term for welfare. They're in a worse condition than they were before all that money was thrown in, because now they have no work ethic. And it's worse than that because there is no reason for blacks to point a finger and say that they are somehow prejudiced against, that they have suffered unfairly, because for the last 30, 40, 50 years, we've had affirmative action, such that it is assumed, it has to be assumed, that blacks are incapable of entering college and getting jobs based on their own merit. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to have affirmative action where minorities, blacks in particular, with lower SAT scores, with lower GPAs, with a less impressive resume, are given the job over a more qualified candidate. What you're saying is that there's something wrong in the community where they're not competitive, so we're going to cheat on behalf of that community. It's the only way for them to prevail. And yet, even cheating over these past 50 years, we're still in the same plight, because they're not taking advantage of it. And listen, ethnicity is not the problem. It has nothing to do with the color of skin, the race. It has all to do with the culture. There are cultures which thrive, and there are cultures which suffer. And the African American culture in America is one of those that is suffering. Anyway, this Ariel Atkins, she says that is reparations. Now, reparations would mean that this is something that they somehow deserve. they deserve the compensation of looting. To say that and to have then the 40 or 50 or 60% of Americans that support this conspiracy, you've dumbed down people to the point that virtually no one is capable of thinking. You can't fix any problem if you can't think. And that's where we are with Black Lives Matter. That's with its leadership, with its behavior, with its slogans, and with those who support them. Anything they wanted to take, they can take because these businesses have insurance. Stealing is okay if the business has insurance. Now, first of all,
well, you pay for it.
The fact that a business has insurance and that they have paid for that insurance and that they now have to file a claim, and not only a claim to restock their shelves, but to rebuild their store, and will probably get a fraction of what was stolen, what was destroyed, years later after they have gone out of business because these immoral creeps acting like animals were rioting and looting and ransacking their stores. And yet it was justified. As a matter of fact, on social media, the social media activists in Black Lives Matter actually encourage them to go downtown Chicago and loot. And they said, you can do this because the police just shot a black man. Well, what they forgot to say is that that man had been involved in everything from child endangerment to armed robbery, and that he shot at police, attempting to kill them before they shot back. Black Lives Matter protesters gathered outside the South Loop police station Monday to show their support for more than 100 individuals who were arrested during the looting on Sunday night. Showing support for looters. That's just like the idiots that think that they're showing support for the man who lost his life in Minnesota when George Floyd was a drug addict, a belligerent criminal, a vicious man who was drugged out of his mind. Our futures have been looted from us, loot back. I was looking at the picture that was taken of those supporting the rioters and the looters. And this sign was held up by 6-8 people. It was 20 feet long, 6 feet tall. And it literally said, our futures have been looted from us, loot back. You know, future looted from them in America. I'm not a patriot. I'm not engaged in politics in America. I'm opposed to both. But as we have said, there is no nation on earth where minorities have a greater opportunity and where there is less racism than the United States. You go to Japan, and if you're not Japanese, you have de minimis rights, and you are discriminated against. If you go to any Islamic country and you're not a Muslim, you have no rights whatsoever. You're abused. If you go to almost any African country and you're not African, you have very few rights. Feel the brunt of racism. On the Caribbean islands where I am, most of the islands have a very serious problem with black against white racism. Serious problem where the system is actually prejudiced against whites. You know, if you're in China and not Chinese, you're discriminated against. America is not that way. It is nothing but lies that promote the basis of Black Lives Matter. There is no such thing as a bad protester, the Black Lives Matter activist and leader said, telling the Chicago Tribune. No such thing as a bad protester. We're also demanding that police be defunded. Why should the police be here? Heck, if the police weren't here, we could loot everything. That is the communist way. If you take everything that productive people have and you give it to the unproductive, the unproductive, they will support the robbers and thugs. And then what happens when there's nothing left to steal? How long is the beneficiary of stolen money going to be satisfied with that stolen money when there are no stores to buy anything because, well, they've looted those, and when there's no one else to rob? What then? Also, we're demanding that police be defunded so we can steal at will, I guess. Police should not be here. They should not exist. No police. Now, what's amazing is, of course, that the Black Lives Matter organizers are communists. And communist countries are police states.
Yeah.
They claim that they're protesting racism, and yet the founder of socialism and communism, Karl Marx, was a despicable racist. Pure hypocrites. They should not exist, especially because we're giving them all this money to beat and terrorize us. Terrorists, huh? You obviously do not understand the word terror. And last time I witnessed the last several hundred videos out of the protest scenes. The ones doing the beatings are the Black Lives Matter protesters. We're giving them all this money when it's like we're in an actual pandemic and people need care right now, but you're giving them police. It's because the people who are the most belligerent and not abiding by safe distancing, not abiding by wearing masks, are the protesters. You're claiming your excuse for doing away with the police is the pandemic, and you are violating the societal norms regarding the pandemic. You are nothing but a disgusting hypocrite. Black Lives Matter is one of the most disgusting organizations in the history of perverted organizations. Black Lives Matter Chicago said earlier Monday's looting of stores was a form of reparations. As I said, the group was in support. They went out in support of more than 100 people who had been arrested the evening before during violent looting. Otherwise, the authorities have tried to block exits after the riots threatened to burn down the city. Ariel Atkins, this Black Lives Matter activist, says, I don't care if someone decides to loot Gucci or Macy's or a Nike store, because that makes sure that person eats. How much food have you had at a Nike or Gucci? Last time I checked, Macy's was not known for its eats. And
got a lot of clothes.
You would have a real tough time justifying making a connection between Gucci and eating, because that makes sure that person eats. That makes sure that person has clothes. Yeah, you're going to loot a Gucci to make certain that a person has. The looters aren't unclothed; they receive welfare. Anything they wanted to take, they can take, because these businesses have insurance, she said. The mayor of Chicago said that, after George Floyd's death, it created a sense of impunity for these rioters. The man whose actions sparked the most recent arrest in Chicago was a 20-year-old. His name was Latrell Allen. He was charged with attempted murder. Allen, who had previous arrests for child endangerment, domestic battery, and burglary. That's a fine man.
Fellow.
Child endangerment, domestic battery, and burglary. For a creep that's only 20 years old. And then he has a gun and he shoots at police. And you want to go protest on behalf of that creep? You know, if that's the best you can do, you ought not be doing anything. You ought to be hanging your head in shame. He was shot and injured by the police returning fire. Social media was soon alight with rallying cries for protests and looting. SWAT teams were seen patrolling the streets in a bid to avoid a repeat of the chaos. Several hundred additional protesters were arrested for looting. Along the Magnificent Mile, people were going in and out of stores carrying shopping bags full of merchandise, as well as a bank. There were vehicles that dropped off looters in the area. I'm telling you, there's no justification for this behavior, ever. But when you have this and have the majority of Americans supporting Black Lives Matter, and celebrities almost to a person supporting them, we've lost our way. I want to speak a little bit about coronavirus. It's about 1 in 15 people who test, about 1 in every 15 cases of coronavirus is actually tested for it. The vast majority of people who get coronavirus, unlike the flu, don't even know they have it. And a very substantial number who get it, their symptoms are so mild, last thing they want to go do is be tested. It's about 15 to 1, those who test positive versus those who've actually been infected with coronavirus. When you look at those numbers, let's take California, for example, that shut everything down not once or twice. You live in California. You know what the mortality rate is for those who have been infected with coronavirus? 0.001.
I was going to say it's way below 1%, certainly.
Same as the flu. Nationally, because of what happened in New Jersey and New York early on, it's 0.002. Again, in the range of the flu. 90% of those who are hospitalized with the coronavirus are seriously ill with cardiovascular, heart, and lung disease, obesity, and diabetes. The U.S. mortality rate for all causes is 0.009. That's the mortality for all causes. About 3 million Americans die each year for all causes. If 350,000 die for coronavirus, we've been under the death count now for 6 months, so at about 170,000, just shy of that, have died. So double that. Let's say that 350,000 died from a combined coronavirus with cardiovascular, heart, lung disease, diabetes, obesity, that sort of thing. And let's count all 350 towards coronavirus, and let's assume that none of those people would have died from the underlying disease that put them in the hospital, when the fact is that probably the majority of them would have died anyway. But if you count all 350,000, that's 10% of the normal death toll in America. It's 10%. I actually think it's 12%. So 12%. It's half of heart disease, half of cancer. And yet, we've destroyed the economy. We've destroyed liberty. And by the way, it doesn't come without other consequences. We warned about this. According to a new CDC report entitled Mental Health and Suicide Indication during the COVID-19 pandemic, over 25% of boys and girls between 18 and 24, and at that point they're young adults, surveyed just in June, this last June, 25.5%, 18 to 24, had serious thoughts about committing suicide during the previous 12 days.
You're kidding.
A quarter of those between 18 and 24. What? We're social creatures. The lockdown is devastating. 25.5%. The levels of suicide tendencies overall more than doubled since 2018, and they nearly quadrupled 4 times since the lockdown for people between ages 25 and 44. And it's the group of people that can't figure out what sides up with Black Lives Matter. It doesn't even realize it's a fraud. When so many people seriously consider suicide, many of them follow through with it. In Fresno, you're not far from Fresno, California, for example, suicides were up 70% in June.
It's a farm community.
Compared to the same period in 2019.
My God.
The National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline has seen a 65% increase in calls and emails since March, mostly among high schoolers. The article reads, just think of the number of young people turning to drugs in their anxiety. Drug overdose deaths are up 47% this year in places like Tennessee, where there have been 354 fatal drug overdoses just in one county from March through July. That dwarfs the number of coronavirus deaths. Dwarfs it. Because people were out of work, kids were home, there were a lot of uncertainty, and the media was in a death-feeding frenzy with so much conflicting information. When Pops would say, when we went out on a domestic call, we talked to people, we had to talk them down from killing themselves. People wanted to fight, the sheriffs say. You could see people's emotions were much more on edge, put them in a state of panic and fear-mongering. He noted how the government is making it even worse by forcing law enforcement to get involved in enforcing what that cop says is ridiculous coronavirus mandates. When you make people feel like they're not safe and the world is coming to an end, all of those things combined create more anxiety and feelings of anger in people when we show up, and now all of a sudden that anger has a chance to be released. And it's clashing not only with law enforcement, but with the very lives of young people. We are, and this was obvious, with the lockdowns and the deprivation of livelihoods of the national and worldwide response to coronavirus, domestic violence is way up. Suicides are way up. Murders are way up. Crime is way up. We are killing people much faster than the virus. Much faster. And on top of all of that, we've destroyed our economy and destroyed our character. I did not think it was possible for the world to devolve to this state so rapidly. Yeah. We're literally one speech away from a worldwide dictator. People are afraid. They're confused. They're unable to think. They're panicked. And the majority of people actually support their government in the lockdowns because they've been so badly indoctrinated. Our problem is not the virus. It's surviving the politicians and the media. This then by Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is a complete fraud. And all Fauci wants is to maintain the power and esteem and recognition he gets for the nation being in the middle of a lockdown and the nation being preoccupied with coronavirus as opposed to preoccupied with the normal positive things in life. And he says, if the United States is allowed for coronaviruses to run rampant and achieve possible herd immunity, the death toll would be massive, especially among vulnerable people. I'll tell you what, that is the only sane option, is herd immunity. And the death toll isn't massive. The death toll will be less than the average death toll every year in America. And there's no way you cannot lock Americans down to keep it at bay. It's in every country of the world. The moment you open back up, it will infect and kill people. If you don't open back up, then you've destroyed the economy. You've destroyed people's character. You've created a climate where far more will die. We are 6 months, maybe a year away from a proven, reliable vaccine if everything goes perfect. And even then, it's unlikely to prevail because too many people are into idiotic conspiracies and won't take it. If everyone contracted it, even with the relatively high percentage, he admits, of people without symptoms, relatively high percentage of people without symptoms. Yes, the majority of people have no symptoms. A lot of people are going to die. Yeah, they are. And a lot of people are going to die if you shut down the economy or if you don't shut down the economy. The only difference is that if you shut down the economy, more people are going to die, and you're going to bankrupt your country, and you're guaranteed to be in a period of anarchy. There is no recovery from this. He says, you look at the United States of America with our epidemic of obesity, with the number of people with hypertension, with people with diabetes. Well, why do they have diabetes? Why do they have hypertension? Why do they have obesity? They have no discipline. Never anybody's responsibility anymore. It's always somebody else's problem. If you can't take, it's just like if you smoke cigarettes, you're going to die of lung cancer. Tough. That was stupid. It's no one's fault but your own. If you die of coronavirus because you were obese, because you have hypertension, because you can't cope with life, not anybody else's problem but your own. Not trying to sound as if I don't care about life. I do. I care more about life than all of these bleeding hearts. It's just that I recognize that what they're doing is counterproductive. And it's based on a pile of lies. I had said on a different subject that when America leaves Afghanistan, it'll be as if we had never been there. Well, the Afghan government released the final 400 Taliban prisoners. And so you can kiss that country goodbye. The Taliban already controls more of Afghanistan than they did before we invaded. You heard that right. The Taliban now controls far more of Afghanistan now than before we invaded. And all of the Taliban terrorists who had been locked up in prison have now been freed. One last comment. Enoch Attaboy, better known as Daddy Go, Daddy General Overseer. He is a Nigerian pastor. Oh, he is beloved by his millions of followers. Oh, Daddy Go. He said if you don't tithe, give 10% of your earnings to his church, you aren't going to heaven. You'll go to hell. Yeah, he is worth about $100 million. Oh, Daddy Go. He has his own Gulf Stream. In fact, they say that his net worth is probably closer to $130 million. The Gulf Stream, probably worth $50 million. Yeah, he is also one that says that no matter how educated or successful you are, Your husband is your head, and you must regard him as such at all times. He recently tweeted his 1.3 million followers. On Instagram, he added about his own wife, "It does not matter what's on her itinerary. If I say, you're going to go with me to so-and-so a place, she has to cancel whatever she was going to do and tag along with me." He sent a post to his married son telling him it'd be a good idea for you to sack a secretary. Yep. It doesn't matter the religion. They're all creeps.
Yeah, it is.
So that said, Kirk, and I think you were studying something this week that you wanted to report on too that didn't sit well with you.
Well, yeah, I can't top that. That's depressing. I could just the enormity of it all, and I agree with you. I don't think, as long as I've been working with you and reading all this stuff, I've never thought it would come to this quick. I mean, I've looked at timelines but it's staggering. It's staggering. But the thing that was interesting to me, just as a casual glance, I read an article about the renters, and they said 30% of the U.S. renters couldn't pay their rent in August. And they said it was because of the federal, they have a federal moratorium on evictions, which is coming to an end in August, and they had a $600 a week booster check for renters, and they had an unemployment benefits that were extended as well. And so and the thought, the minute you say something like that, when they cut off, the example you used to use all the time, you give somebody $1,000 as a gift every month, and then one day you say, I can't do this anymore. And then they get mad about it instead of taking the money and learning how to do something with it. I do know of a lady who got her check from the government. She immediately bought a car, and she didn't have enough money to buy a car, but she's going to drive around for it for as long until they take it away. I'm going, are you kidding me?
That's great. Yeah. Can you imagine that? Unemployment benefits. There's the benefit of being unemployed. What? Your government will give you $600 a week.
Okay, now think about this.
Well,
think about this.
Yeah, benefits for being unemployed.
The first, not a helping hand just to bridge a gap, but I mean, it's like can't live without it. They have spent $5 trillion in this last one, inflating everything, destroying the dollar even faster than it was being destroyed. And now you're going to throw another $5 trillion in there because it would have to be. I mean, the politicians are going to kick this can down the road. Pelosi is not going to be fine. She's already got $1 billion. She'll leave whenever she can't stand it anymore. These people don't care. And then you've got, then you look at that and you say, oh my God, what do these people do? You can't throw them out. Even if you could throw them out, you can't throw them out. It's not enough too many bodies and nobody to enforce it. They would riot. You'd have anarchy. We're an armed populace. So this is the makings of anarchy all over the place. I mean, there's no way to get away from this.
Let's say that you lived on Kirk Island, and on Kirk Island, there were 1,000 shells. The shells represented the currency, and there were 1,000 shells, and everything on that island, the land, the homes, the businesses, the savings accounts, everything was valued based upon the value of those 1,000 shells.
Okay. And
you decide that, what if I went out there and I found 10,000 more shells, all of which were like the original 1,000 shells, and I brought those 10,000 shells into Kirk Island. And now everything is valued based upon 11,000 shells. You didn't change the value of your business or your home. All you did is you now said that it's no longer being valued based upon 1,000 shells, but 11,000 shells. What you have done is destroyed the value of everyone's holding.
Okay.
That's what we do when we add to the money supply.
Let me give you another example. Here's let's say that you look at all those millions of dollars that Washington supposedly had, and you say, well, everybody, they could write a check for $1 million for every human being in the United States. So they do. And you get up in the morning, and of course we don't have these anymore, but you get up in the morning and you say, where's my newspaper? And you say, where the hell is little Johnny? So you call Mr. Smith down the end of the street, and you say, Johnny didn't deliver my paper. And he tells you, well, little Johnny just got $1 million. He don't work for you no more. He don't care about delivering the paper. You've done nothing. You've destroyed the entire system.
Mm-hmm. And by the way,
gained? And after a while, the energetic ones will get it. Yeah, no, yeah. So the whole you can't run things based on that. It has to have.
If you give everybody, why would the farmer farm? Why would the truck driver drive? Why would the grocer check you out? Why would the stocker stock the shelves?
Well, I did see a glimmer of hope on something. Listen to this. You've got the Federal Reserve. They're now not only buying blue chips, because God knows nobody would buy Amazon if they don't buy it, I guess. And then you have junk bonds. They're buying tons of junk bonds. So what we need to do is we need to form a company, launch this company, and guarantee that it's a lousy company and we'll never be able to pay it back and have the government buy all the stock in it.
There you go.
Who buy junk bonds with your tax dollars?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, but we'll make it affirmative action so that it's reparations. Then it will come to pass. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I know.
Then it will come to pass. It's going to happen that he who remains and survives all of this in Zion, not in New York, not in New Jersey, not in Sacramento, not in any place other than in Zion, along with the remnants spared in Jerusalem. They're going to be called set apart. For all who approach him will be written and inscribed in the book of lives.
The book of lives.
In Jerusalem, the source from which guidance, teaching, and direction regarding reconciliation flow. So, Kirk, how is it possible for Christianity to be valid if God is maintaining the book of lives for those who are in Zion and Jerusalem?
Well, then you have to translate Zion as something else, but you can't do it the way it is. To pull that off. And y'all didn't change. Y'all told you where Zion was. We all know where Zion is.
Yeah, it's Mount Moriah.
The signpost on the way in Mount Moriah.
Right. And Jerusalem, last time I checked, hasn't moved.
No, not at all.
No,
not at
it's in the heart of the province of Yahudah, which is in the midst of Israel.
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. And so if the book of lives is for the remnant of people who are in Zion and Jerusalem, the book of lives is not comprised of Christians living in New York City, is it?
No, sir.
Or in the Vatican?
No.
No.
No,
sorry, Charlie, but there is no basis for this notion of a church. God doesn't have a church. He's not coming back for his church. Christians' names are not written in the book of lives. And by the way, the book of lives is very similar, of course, to the tree of lives, which is central branch of that tree is David. And he is, of course, the one that Yahweh is returning with. So if you are now a Yahudim Jew or Israelite, and you're looking at the world collapse, you've got Black Lives Matter, which is vehemently anti-Semitic. That's the religion of man, socialist, secular humanism, communism. They are intensely anti-Semitic.
Yes.
And the one country that you have been reasonably safe up to this point, the United States, is now in free fall, in a death spiral. And Europe has been flooded with Muslims, and anti-Semitism is at the same level as it was on the precipice of World War II. And you've seen, just in the last 6 months, the entire world fall apart. God is giving you a warning. You now have time. If this was happening in 2029, 2030, 3 or 4 years from the ultimate demise of humankind, it'd be tough to get your act together and get on the road and go to Jerusalem, but that's not the case now. You have time. That's the single ray of hope in all of this. Maybe there's two. One is that you have time. You've got 13 years. You have time. You can go. And second, an orderly withdrawal to the promised land. And second, this notion that most people have a trouble because of the normalcy fallacy, which you think that because yesterday was a certain way and so was the day before, that tomorrow will be that way. Well, we have shattered that. We have shattered
that. Ended.
Yes, it's been shattered. So now you can see just where we're headed and how soon we're going to get there. One thing simply follows another with the leadership of these bastions of society that Yahweh disdained. His diatribe in Yeshaya chapter 3, they're now rejected and removed, along with those who dressed in support of them. The only people who remain in Jerusalem will be covenant members who are set apart and unto Yah. This is the remnant Yahweh spared because they acknowledge the signs posted along the way. And of course, they are called set apart, which means they are set apart from the ways of man, from religion and politics and now conspiracy. Whereupon, meeting these conditions, the upright one of mine shall wash away the excrement and filth of all of the daughters of Zion, and by association purge and rinse away the blood of Jerusalem from the midst of the way, the spirit of good judgment regarding the means to resolve disputes, and by the spirit of blowing rage. God's not kidding around. We've said this before.
No.
He is going to wash away the filth. He is going to wash away the excrement. And he's going to begin cleaning house on Zion. And then Jerusalem. And then Yehudah. And then Yisrael. He's cleaning house. Literally, cleaning house. That's his home. He is not going to live in the squalor. He is not going to live with rats infected with plague that think, killing Jews is fun. I'm justified in doing so. Looting is fun. I'm justified in doing so. Stealing people's money through a tithe is my way of enriching myself. I'm justified in doing so. Yeah, God says, I'm washing away the filth like you. Human dung. The immoral decrees of the daughters of Zion. What's the daughters of Zion? All those religious and political dogmas that were founded in large part by Jews. Christianity, founded by Paul, a Jew. Islam, founded by Muhammad, a Jew.
A Jew.
Yep.
Hitler.
And Hitler.
Jewish roots.
Jewish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lenin.
You look at the founders of communism, socialist secularism, huge percentage of them Jewish, much higher percentage than the population as a whole. And in academia, which has turned so much against Israel, high percentage of Jews. God says, I'm going to wash it all away from her midst. And he's going to do so by way of the spirit of good judgment regarding the means to resolve disputes. You know, and by a spirit of glowing rage. You know, that's the thing that we have just don't have any appreciation of. You know, you look at a protest like Black Lives Matter, and they're protesting hate, which they consider to be racial hatred, and the hate that they're protesting is almost non-existent. But their hate towards those who are successful, those who would hold them accountable, is extreme because they can't exercise good judgment. And so God says, I'm going to show that hate is a virtue if you know what to hate, how to hate, why to hate. Because if you don't hate, people die. If you don't hate, women are abused. If you don't hate, children
are molested. Yeah, absolutely.
We need to know that hate is a virtue. We ought to hate rape and rapists. We ought to hate pedophilia and pedophiles. We ought to hate murder and mass murderers. We ought to hate
thieves,
people who abuse other people. We ought to hate looting and those who encourage it. And if we don't, there's something wrong with us. We've lost the ability to exercise good judgments. We have lost the ability to intellectually resolve disputes, to make good decisions, to be just, to render sound decisions. And so God's saying he hadn't lost it. He's going to apply good judgment and then righteous indignation. Because he is disgusted. He is disgusted by what liberals have done to, and it's just so amazing. There was the Communist Party, they call themselves Democratic Communists, as if there's ever been a Democratic Communist government. It's an oxymoron. Nonetheless, they're the Democratic Communists of New York City went to the New York City political candidates. So these are not national candidates, they're New York City candidates, and said that their group would support them with money and votes if they'd promise never to travel to Israel and to do no business with Israel.
Right.
And they say that because Israel, from their view, is occupying Palestine. Now, there is no Palestine. There has never been a Palestine. There is no such thing as a Palestinian. The last Philistine, which they are usurping their name, was killed 2,500 years ago. There's no such thing. The whole thing is a complete lie. And moreover, the religion of the so-called mythical Fakistinians is Islam, which is universally fascist. Israel is about the most liberal country on earth. They're very progressive from a socialist point of view. And these morons are just so blinded by their anti-Semitism that nonetheless is their litmus test as to who they're going to support. There's no wonder God's enraged. When it comes to removing the filth of religion from his land, Yahweh's not going to be compassionate. He's not going to be negotiable. He's not going to be compromising or tolerant. But he will be consistent and fair. He has stated that he will be judgmental and fierce. His standard has not and will not change. It remains his misfot, his means to exercise good judgment regarding the means to resolve disputes. Misfot is just like so many things in Hebrew, And Kirk, you had a massive breakthrough in terms of our understanding by looking at the slants of Hebrew letters, the orientation of a Hebrew letter, and recognizing that the way that you went about knowing if a letter was going to have a positive or negative connotation in its rendering the word is whether it was looking away from or toward letters in Yahweh's name. And
correct.
One of the things that I discovered, and I don't know why it took, a non-scholar to figure this out, but a word like mishpat, it's simply a compound word. It's like mikra. It's a compound word. Mikra is based on kara with the mi sound, my in Hebrew, before it. A mishpat is Shabbat with the my sound before it. What's my in Hebrew?
It's always
means to ponder, to question, to probe.
Ask the question: who, what, where, when,
right.
why, how.
Actually, yes. So mishpat is encouraging us to ask the questions of who, what, when, why, and how of exercising good judgment, to decide, to differentiate, to be discriminating, to be thoughtful, to discern between good and bad, right and wrong, truth and lies. So it's a very simple concept when you take these terms and you analyze how the words were comprised, but that's what mishpat means. Time and time again, we find that God is a proponent of righteous indignation. He sets an example that we'd be wise to follow. Hate is a virtue when it is properly directed, when we know what to hate and how to hate. And you do not hate as the Black Lives Matter folks do, which is you cast aspersions at people who are innocent, and yet you yourself are guilty of what you're blaming them for.
Perfect.
And then you show your hate by stealing, robbing, burning, protesting, screaming. Yep. That's not appropriate. What's appropriate is to say pedophilia is bad, racism is bad, cops being overtly aggressive, militaristic in their actions. That's bad. The judicial system not being just, being corrupt is bad. Our military's propensity to make bad situations much worse is bad. And so it is important for us to recognize that there are things which we ought to dislike to the point that we despise them.
Correct.
And if we don't, then we can't be just, we can't be moral, we can't be right. But the response is not to be vicious, it's not to kill, it's not to hurt, it's not to lash out stones or rocks or swords or guns. Wield words wisely.
Wisely, true.
That's a simple answer. Expose and condemn things like Black Lives Matter when they justify looting and rioting. Expose and condemn Islam when it justifies and encourages terrorism. Expose and condemn communism when they speak about how their system is going to enrich and liberate people when it impoverishes and enslaves people. Use your words. Then Yahweh will create, initiating something cutting edge, borrowing, upon every location and dwelling place around the world? Nope. Along the ridge line of Zion,
right,
as well as over her mikra, are invitations to be called out and meet, coming together to be welcomed, to read and recite, to be summoned, by way of a cloud by day, along with smoke, and with a brilliant shining radiance of majestic light, of flaming fire by night. For indeed, upon all of this manifestation of power and glory will be a sheltering canopy. I don't think you've been to, and most of our listeners have not been to Jerusalem. And they have not been on along the ridgeline of Moriah.
Mm-hmm.
But you can Google it and look at it. It is a very, very, very small place. You couldn't put, if you did it right, if you realized that Yahweh is going to build his house for all of us to share on the summit of Mount Moriah, and Dod's home, who is the King of Kings, shall be at the bottom of that ridgeline. Between the two, I mean, I think it was 777 strides. I mean,
that's what you'd say.
we're talking
You
about
measured
a
it
small
all.
area. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And God's talking about the remnant of his people all living there. All of them. You couldn't comfortably put 1,000 people there. In fact, if you were to put even close to that number there, you would destroy the natural beauty of the place. You know, I'm certain that God's idea of beauty isn't, to pave over paradise. So what gives? How is this possible? And I'm going to propose a thought here that seems to make some sense, at least to me.
Yeah.
Is that the people that are going to be residing here are no longer going to be three-dimensional. We are going to be part of that brilliant, shining, radiant light, which means that being grounded is no longer something that is going to limit us. We're no longer confined to space and time. And so it is very possible that this ridgeline above Zion could be what we'd call a hypercube. We're now fully three-dimensional, going up into space, having a magnificent view from, I'd like a view from 50,000 feet. I think it would be lovely to have a view from 50,000 feet. But a hypercube is infinite in time. I think that's what we're talking about here. I think that Yahweh is going to enable a very substantial number of us to enjoy living in proximity to him, living in proximity to Dode, enjoying being part of the most magnificent city in the world, on the most prestigious hill on earth.
In the world. On earth, yes.
Yeah. And the way that he can do that is for a very substantial number of us to be empowered so that we're no longer stuck by gravity or time.
Well, in space, yeah.
Yeah, that we'll have a room with a view.
Oh, I guess.
Yeah, wouldn't you love to be at 50,000 feet overlooking Yahweh's new home for the covenant family and those in the magnificent bridge between the two and flowing waters and glistening light? Wouldn't it be just a marvelous place to come back and enjoy camaraderie while then you go off and explore? I mean, it's going to be the opposite of coronavirus. Rather than stay at home, it's going to be, oh, you're liberated.
No
come back
social
if you wish to celebrate. And rather than social distancing, it's going to be party hardy.
No. Yeah, shake hands and
enjoy
share
one
wine.
another's company. Yeah. Rather than being deprived, it would be the opposite.
Uh-huh.
And of course, what is the emphasis here? It's not only Zion, as well as over her mikra. You know, Zion is Zion because this is the place where Yahweh fulfilled Pesach. It is where matzah was completed, begun and completed, such that there could be Bakurim, firstborn children. It is where the world first experienced the fulfillment of Shavuot. And make no mistake that Towrah starts in Jerusalem. And of course, we know that is about reconciling Yahweh's relationship with Israel and Yehudah, and first and foremost with that remnant that is on Zion and in Jerusalem. Going to be protected with a cloud, and yet enveloped in brilliant, shining radiance of majestic light. For upon all of this manifestation of power, there will be a sheltering canopy. I think that canopy could go up miles into the atmosphere. It could be hundreds of thousands of feet. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, could most definitely be. The protective canopy that's described in the letters is the last letter is interesting because it's a hey, and it kind of begs the question. It answers the question, I should say, of what is it protecting? It's protecting the ones who say, behold it, the ones who acknowledge Yahweh, engage in the thing. It's an interesting word. You wouldn't think it would be written that way, just to be a canopy.
Yes.
So, but he includes that in it.
It's a mouth, too. It's the spoken word.
Uh-huh. Yes. So, it's just, and it's a feminine word as well. So if anybody has a house, hang up on that. But it's otherwise, it would just be a little blanket. And the
K would be a picket fence, wouldn't it?
Protective fence, absolutely.
So the sheltering canopy is a protective fence based upon the word on behalf of those who stand upright, reaching up and looking up to God.
Those that have been increased, those that have been empowered and enlightened, you could also include because of the Wah. The Wah is in there as well. Yeah.
In the Mizmor Psalms, we'll discover that upon his return with Yahweh, Dod will be as brilliant as the sun. And while his light will continue to be the brightest, he's the most brilliant man who ever lived, he's not going to be alone. There is an aspect of this that I've just shared. The circumstances surrounding the 1,000-year celebration of Sukkah from year 6,000 to 7,000 Yah are going to be different than during any other period of history. We, from the time Adam and Chawah were expelled from Eden to our return to Eden was 6,000 years. That 7,000 years is God's idea of perfection. Perfection means we're liberated, we're empowered, we're enriched, we're the children of our Creator. This is not normal time. The Torah is no longer an external document that we can read, that we choose to the best of our ability to observe and to understand so that we can incorporate its teachings into our lives. His Torah is literally
part of the fabric of our lives.
Yes. Yeah. It becomes part of our internal programming. So I think during this time, I am fairly certain that we are going to be liberated fully in the fourth dimension time. But I have this sense that we're going to be liberated in the fifth and sixth dimensions. And I think that there will be some of us who have the Teruah harvest, who were already part of Yahweh's spiritual family prior to his return. I think we're going to be seven dimensions. So I think this is going to be a mix between 6 and 7-dimensional beings, because this special time is Yahweh's time of perfection and celebration.
Well,
so all of those who are part of this remnant who accepted Yah prior to his return will continue to exist in, I don't know if it's 3 dimensions, 3.5 dimensions, 4 dimensions, remaining physical beings, but in a perfect world, while the rest of us are 7 dimensions.
Wow. Good house.
Yeah, a reference to the Mikra was included here, I think, for a couple of reasons. First, Yahweh is returning on the Mikra of Tomorrow, the day of reconciliations. And that's why he is talking about the remnant of his people in Jerusalem. You know, the scene that is being described here that God is talking about is a celebration of the Mikra of Sukkah, which is going to be celebrated for all eternity, but in particular on earth for 1,000 years. And second, it's an individual's willingness to observe the Mikra, which serves as the determining factor regarding which souls will be removed and discarded, and which will become part of the surviving remnant, which will live in the midst of the light. Now, 5 days after Yahweh's return, he and his son, after they've removed all traces of religion and the religious, as soon as Yahweh has transformed the land back into the beautiful environment enjoyed in the Garden of Eden, then Yahweh's going to celebrate Sukkah, camping out with his covenant family for 1,000 years. That has always seemed obvious to me. It's the reason we're told of the story that took place in the Garden of Eden. It's why Sukkah, God's idea of perfection, is called camping out. Well, here's what was written by the prophet Yeshayah. Then there will exist temporary sheltered dwelling to camp out, serving as a representation of something manifesting greater dimensions, la desel, by the light of day out of Horeb, which is the mountain of God where the Torah was revealed. It will be a protected place and a safe shelter from the outpouring of floodwaters and from the rain. So, God's got nothing against rain. And outpouring of waters is a good thing. Floodwaters, of course, will wash away the damage. Right. But so there will exist a temporary sheltered dwelling to camp out, a sukkah. So if you think that maybe God is dropping a hint that we're talking about sukkah, well, he did, because he said, there will exist sukkah.
Pretty big hint.
Yes. Serving as a representation of something manifesting greater dimensions. Yeah. Being able to camp out with God for all time in the universe. So sukkah on earth is a representation of something in greater dimensions, which is camping out with Yahweh in the universe as a 7-dimensional being. Tessel, to create a shadow and provide protection, addressing the idea of interposing something between an object and the source of the light, serving as a restoring transition by the light of day out of Torah. So this 7th day opportunity to camp out with our Heavenly Father is described. It is a manifestation of, it is a result of what was conveyed on Cherub. And the only thing that matters on Cherub is that Yahweh met with man, and Yahweh revealed his Torah to us.
Torah, yes.
Yep. It will be a protected place and a place of shelter from the outpouring of the the floodwaters, which are washing away all of the religion, politics, militarism, and conspiracy, and from the rain. This is Yeshaya 4:6. Was there any words there, Kirk, that you wanted to expound upon?
Not really. They, I didn't get a chance to get into them real depth. So, but
You've had your hands full, haven't you? You've had your hands full.
This week. Yeah. But sukkah is very interesting. I will say something about that. Even though we usually, it also means booth, which is interesting because they would go out in the booth and the temporary shelter, of course, and tent and the tent and the tabernacle as well. And it is it's written as once again, the shemek, which is the material that you make the fence out of, the thorny bushes. So it gives the impression too that it's a protective place. Obviously, reinforces that. You have the next one is the wall, which allows you to. It's the matter of increasing in the family, increasing in enlightenment, increasing in empowerment, and then it has a welcoming hand, which is it has the kaf, which is a hand, opened hand, welcoming hand. Right. And then of course it finishes with a hey. Once again, the person acknowledging the people who are wise enough to stand up and walk with Yah and walk to Yah through the Moed Mikros and become perfect, to be made perfect in His eyes. So it's a pretty good word for old sukkah. I mean, yeah. So
indeed, it will be a sheltered place, a safe place. We're going to camp out in a very adventurous yet safe way with Yahowah. It's there's a note in the forum. It says, is this remnant Jews? Is it Yisrael and Yehuda? And the answer is absolutely.
Yehudim related to Yah. Yeah. Everyone will be Yehuda.
We will all be related to Yah. We'll all be beloved of Yah. We will all be Yisrael, which are those who engage and endure with God. But keep in mind that we despise the Black Hebrew roots and the Black Hebrew movement and the Hebrew roots movement and the Messianic movement and all of these twisted religions that
take you away
are
from
claiming that they are the true Israel, and that and they're all, of course, anti-Semitic on top of that. And the fact of the matter is, being ethnically Jewish matters to God. There's only one race that matters, and the rest of us are mutts. So while we can observe the Torah, take advantage of the Mikra, be part of the covenant, God revealed Himself to one group of people. He has made promises to one group of people, and they are ethnic Jews. So their DNA matters, and the rest of us can be full rights children in the household of God. But we would be unwise to think that ethnically we matter, because we don't. There are Israelites and there are Goyim, and a Goyim is a mutt from God's point of view. It's not necessarily bad to be a Goyim, so long as you don't incorporate any of the ways of the Goyim, and that instead you choose to sojourn and to camp out with, and to cast your lot in with Yisrael. Otherwise, you are indeed in a terrible way. Since this is especially revealing, this Teslim and the image of, I wanted just to return to what Yahweh said about being made in His image, and we find that in Bereshith 1:26. And God said, "Let us produce a shah. Let us make effect, bring about, fashion, observe, ordain, celebrate. Let's engage and act such that we create the man Adam in our image. So this is interesting. It's Ha-Adam. It didn't say Enosh for mortal humankind.
Very specific man.
Yeah, it's a specific name. Ha-Adam, the man. This one and only singular man, whose name was Adam. In our image, Tesla, resemblance, pattern, and model. From an unused root, it means shade. Shade, will cast a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional object in our image, after our likeness, similitude, and manner. It's comparable to us. This was followed by, so God created for association Adam in his own image. In the image of the Almighty, he created him, male and female. He created them. Fascinating, of course, that means that God has both masculine and feminine characteristics. And that means that much of what we manifest can be seen in God. We're an upright creature. We're capable of using our hands. We're a very vocal creature with language, both written and spoken. We build homes. We raise our children. We love our spouses. We build families. We educate our children. We go to work to contribute to the lives of those in our family. We value.
To build.
We have different roles, in our families. We create shelters to protect our family. We resembles our Heavenly Father and spiritual mother. So God thereby explained how we were created and how and has now revealed what we will become. While it may not seem like much to grow from 3 dimensions to 7, each step along the way represents an infinite increase in capability. So just as 3 dimensions are infinitely greater than 2, the transition from 3 to 7 is infinity to the 4th power. Now, that doesn't get your attention. The immense power of an atom bomb is merely based upon E equals mc squared, with the speed of light being a finite number. Indeed, I have examined and considered your universe and spiritual realm. It is the work of your fingers. The moon and the stars show the way to what you have fashioned and formed. What is mortal man, that you are mindful of him? Even a son of Adam, that you actually and continually choose to acknowledge him? That was, Ms. Moore Psalm.
Dode.
From Dode, 8.3, 8.4. And so we recognize that this whole idea about being created in the image of God, that we are exceedingly similar to God. We're just not in as many dimensions. And dimensions matter because with time comes the opportunity to grow and to learn. And with each dimension, we grow. We have vastly more capability. And so God has just made us in his image, just in lesser dimensions. Dode said, indeed, I have examined and considered your universe and your spiritual realm. It is the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars. They show the way to what you have fashioned and formed. What is Enosh? Humankind. That you're mindful of him. Zakar. Even a son of Adam. That you actually continually choose to acknowledge him. Well, that's the answer. We were created in the image of God for the purpose of a relationship. You have somewhat deprived him of the dimensions, exactly as we said, have withheld a little bit from him as it relates to something which is indeed needed, thus pertaining to a relatively lower and diminished position compared to Almighty God. And yet you have honored him with a significant presence the best qualities. God has given us so much, and we have squandered so much of it. He's given us these magnificent eyes that we can use to observe the world around us, including reading his Torah teaching. He's given us ears that we can listen to what he had to say. Given us his magnificent physical bodies that, unlike other animals, we can stand upright, not grovel on the dirt, freeing our hands to do things, to create, to build, to write. We've been given the most powerful brains of all of the animal world to process, to think. In the Psalma, so that we might differentiate between right and wrong. He gave us free will so that we could choose with whom we wanted to spend our eternity. God gave us life, that during that time we might use all these wonderful gifts that he has given us to form a relationship with our Creator. God has given us such marvelous gifts, and yet we squander them. The Black Lives Matter. We're justified in stealing because our lives are so miserable. Well, it's your fault. Life's not miserable. Dode's life was not miserable. Those of us who are part of the covenant live very joyful, happy lives. It doesn't matter what other people say or do. We're content, satisfied, exuberant, delighted with our relationship with Yah. It is intellectually stimulating. It is emotionally satisfying. It's a great adventure. Dode then says, "You have spoken proverbs to him." Yeah, and Dode wrote them. Mashal, you have shared relevant examples and insightful stories regarding the works of your hands. The dedication of a father to everything under his feet. Mizmor lyric Psalm 8:6. Simply stated, we are a three-dimensional beings with many qualities similar to our Creator, and one day those who follow the Zion signpost through the Torah teachings will come to participate in the Bereth covenant by way of the Mikre invitations, and will be elevated to 7 dimensions. Consequences is mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yes.
Yahweh has given us knowledge and the ability to evaluate these things logically. We were given the Word and the ability to understand what God has done and why he has done these things the way he has done them through the Nesama, conscience. Intellectually, we were deliberately afforded similar abilities to our Creator so that we could relate to him, we could appreciate him. Our understanding, however, is of course limited to our access to a complete and perfect copy of Yahweh's guidance, and by the slower processing capability of our human brains, both of which he will rectify. Satan, for example, was not given free will or an Asama conscience. My guess is he craves both. And at the 6th verse concludes the 4th chapter. The 4th chapter of Yashayah is very, very short. Let's review it before we pursue the full implications of Shamak, which is the word that brought us here, which most typically means branch, but can speak of that which is growing and flourishing. It reads, in that day, 7 belligerent and stubborn, hardened and harsh women will be overpowering, aggressive and assertive with one man, approaching while shouting, "Our own bread we will eat, and our own clothes we will wear." Nevertheless, I had that. In other words, we don't want to get the scraps off the table that misogynist men have thrown our way, and we don't want to have to play religious dress-up anymore. Nevertheless, let us be called by your name with it upon us, to remove our reproach as a result of our taunting insults and blasphemous slurs, even our harmful statements. In this day, which is his day, living vegetation will sprout and thrive, branching out and growing, while the branch will spring forth, greatly increasing every aspect of life, bringing the mission to fruition, successfully completing everything which is required to support abundant life, enabling it to branch out and grow for Yahweh. He shall be accordingly beautiful and splendorous, reaching out in a valuable and honorable way, and will therefore approach as a glorious manifestation, majestic, and eminently wonderful, fruitful offspring of the land, also gloriously attractive and shining in appearance as a remnant of survivors of Yisrael and Yehudah. Then it will come to pass that those who remain in Zion, along with the remnant spared in Jerusalem, will be called set apart. For all who approach him will be permanently written and recorded in the book of lives in Jerusalem. Thereupon, meeting these conditions, the upright one of mine shall wash away the excrement and the filth of the daughters of Zion by association, purge and rinse away the bloodstains and the blood guilt, which is a consequence of killing, and the residue of death of Jerusalem from her midst, by way of the spirit of good judgment regarding the means to resolve disputes, and by the spirit of righteous indignation. Then Yahweh will create and initiating something cutting edge over every location and dwelling along the ridgeline of Zion, as well as over its mikra, her invitations to be called out and meet, by way of a cloud by day and smoke, and a brilliant shining radiance, a majestic light of a flaming fire by night. For indeed, upon all of this manifestation of power and glory will be a sheltering canopy. There will exist a temporary sukkah, sheltered dwelling, to camp out. Yes, a sukkah, serving as a representation of something manifesting greater dimensions by the light of day out of Towrah, the mountain of God, where the Torah was revealed, from the outpouring of floodwaters and from the rain. We aren't there yet, Kirk, but we're not very far away.
Mm-hmm. No.
You know, it's been just 13 years of shy of 6,000 years ago that man was last in Eden. And we're heading back. Mm-hmm. And this time there'll be a difference, and the difference is that the Eden was originally at the headwaters of the Tigris, Euphrates rivers, and the Gishon, and the like, which means it was like where we see Lake Van in Turkey today, eastern part of Turkey, and now the Eden. Well, it's going to be the entire earth for the no reason for walls and cherubs to keep trouble at bay.
Yeah. Yes.
But the heart of Eden will now be in Jerusalem.
Yes.
So it'll be moved, and while Adam and Chawah were probably beautiful, and it was probably a marvelous, it wasn't probably, it was absolutely a marvelous life. The difference is that we're going to be greatly empowered and enriched at this point. We're going to be elevated in dimensions. God's made that very clear. So this experience of Sukkah is going to be way beyond anything that existed. There's same model, just exponentially better, a richer, exciting experience.
Craig, I was thinking when I had a art school down in Orange County, one of my students was the light show designer and engineer for Disney. Every light show he designed. And boy, he'd get a kick out of this one. Boy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He'd say, wow.
I love those laser light shows, but I love fireworks. And, one of the nature's fireworks is one of my favorites. I love it when a good thunderstorm rolls by and you're seeing the sky all light up, and then you feel the reverberation of the thunder, and then you feel particularly the thunderstorms, because it's always in the warmth of the summer, and the rain pelts down, and it's a warm, cleansing, invigorating rain, and because of the ionization of the air, you just feel alive, and yet you're seeing nature's light show, and feeling the reverberations of it, and imagine that a million, billion, gazillion
times better. Yeah. Wow. Well, that's incredible insight.
Yeah,
I think it's right too. I think you're right too, buddy. Yeah.
When Yahweh says that Dode will come back as brilliant as the sun, well, imagine what we all must be like for that to be a positive thing.
Yeah. Got to be similar. Same ballpark. Yeah. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So it's God specifically says that at that time we're not going to need the light of the sun, because Yahweh is going to be the sun. It is a very different experience, and of course there just weren't Hebrew words to fully express this dimensionality, although Tessel does a pretty good job. That's one of the things about Hebrew, is it's the language that it just keeps on giving. It's our ability to fully comprehend what God is saying is so much greater today than it was back then. Now, I'm going back and I'm translating the creation account for the opening chapters of Yada Yahweh. And it's amazing how with each scientific breakthrough, another aspect of God's story is affirmed. It's one of the most recent ones is that we sent this marvelous new satellite up that is a much larger telescope than Hubble.
Than Hubble was, yeah. I heard about that.
And it was specifically designed to search for water. This giant telescope that is just tuned for the frequencies of molecular water went up because scientists recognize that liquid water is the elixir of life. That frozen water doesn't work, boiling water doesn't work, steam, liquid water. It is the elixir of life. Without liquid water, there just is no life. So in the search for life, this particular orbiting telescope was created. And prior to it going up, scientists were of the conclusion that water did not come to exist until halfway through the universal gestation, when first generation stars exploded, supernovas, and the heavier elements were made, because oxygen is way too heavy an element to have existed according to their theories. And so they were expecting to say there's going to be, early in the universe, star formation that's not coming from water. But the creation account is God saying that stars are born in molecular clouds of water. Yeah. So guess what? This telescope found.
Yes.
Water was prevalent right at the inception of the Big Bang, and that oxygen was formed in those situations, and because oxygen and hydrogen are positive and negative and naturally attract, and that that molecular hydrogen is far more prevalent than just the singular atom of hydrogen. It's more stable. So you already had the H2, and oxygen not only existed, but you have a positive and negative attraction. It forms an extraordinarily receptive bond, and it is, in fact, was in those molecular clouds of water that stars were formed, because the water is a heat sink. And what we found is that stars, you go from energy to matter, that requires a tremendous cooling, and it was water, even though this was super high temperature water, it was still a heat sink to lower the overall ambient temperature of the energy such that matter could form. And what it has subsequently found is that in all of these nebula, and the nebula are, if you look at Hubble's in particular, but all of the satellite pictures, the nebula are these massive and beautifully colored images. I mean, I listed so many of them in the chapter, but of course we know the horse head and the nebula and the crab nebula, and there's one that's in the shape of looks like the shape of a human eye. And there's so many of these magnificent. They have one they call the pillars of creation, of these beautiful nebula, which are molecular clouds. And guess what? Within these molecular clouds is where stars are being born even today. And so now we have gone from science saying, nope, that part's not true, that there wasn't a lot of molecular water originally, and that's not where stars came from. It was that the stars created the oxygen that later became water. And it's the other way around. And we've proven that his creation account was accurate.
Yeah. So what do the scientists do when they discover this? Do they just blow it off? I mean, that Yahweh was right, or they just ignore it completely?
Yeah, then it's like the if you go back to 1950, 99% of scientists thought that the concept of an expanding universe, a created universe, was appalling, because it would be consistent with what Yahowah had to say. They didn't know him by name, but and so the idea that the universe was created was appalling to them. It just had to always
until the Big Bang,
and then they found, oops, we've got an expanding universe. It therefore
started
was smaller than it is, and it ultimately go back to a point, and then they found out, there's the residue of the Big Bang. The Wilkinson probe found that, and you can date it. It's just shy of 14 billion years from at least the formation of matter. That's not from the time of the Big Bang, because time doesn't flow until matter is formed. But we were able to time it, and then they just all accepted it, and they ignored the fact that prior to that time that science taught that the universe was not created. But now they're saying, now Big Bang. No need for God. Even though God said it 3,500 years ago. Same thing with water.
Shame on them.
Talking about relativity in time. And the fact that it all began with light energy, and then the energy then cooled to become Raka, space and matter. It's a beautiful story, and so much affirmation along the way. And the more we learn, the better we're able to appreciate his testimony. I just finished, I think it's the 5th chapter. Actually, now there's 4 kind of prologue chapters, and then so it's actually 9 chapters, I guess, or 10 into Yada Yah, and it's amazing how powerful the story is, and how there's just a word here or there that you say, okay, why did Yahweh use Yabesh is a word which is translated dry land, and it really doesn't mean dry land. It's symbolic of something vastly more powerful, and so I began to track down what particularly Yahshua had to say about it, and all of a sudden you find there's this beautiful redemption story that we're drawn to when we make the connections. And just every bit of it is just marvelous. I can't wait to return to the creation account and tell Yah's story, because it is so brilliantly written. It's so uplifting. It's so encouraging and affirming. What he had to say to us and why he said it this way. Well, Kirk, that's the end of our program for today. We'll do this again next week. I hope you get some rest, some sleep. I know you've had some tough days. It's been particularly tough as Terry's time here winds down with us, and I wish you and Terry every blessing and benefit in the time that you have together.
Thank you.
You know, one of these days before long, I hope to see you here on
Paradise, huh?
St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's a lovely place to be, and a lot of wonderful people here. So we hope that you, and I know Dr. Jeff is another that is contemplating a move here, and then once we get our world a little bit more squared away with our home remodel, we'll have other members of the Covenant family here. So may Yah bless. Stay safe from the COVID virus. Stay safe from government and media intervention and activism, and away from the Black Lives Matter rioters and protesters. It is a marvelous time to be alive and to be part of Yah's call to bring his people home. May Yah bless. Good night, Kirk.
Good night. Enjoyed it. Shalom.